It hit me like a ton of bricks.
Any father would have to see for himself.
I'll never forget going down the hallway in the basement of that hospital to the morgue and going in there, and when they pulled that sheet back, I fell to my knees. And then I can remember walking out there, and it was up.
What if the last decision you ever make feels so ordinary that you don't even remember making it? The low hum of late-night traffic, distant music fading behind a closed door, footsteps on a familiar street, the kind you've walked 100 times without thinking. Nothing feels wrong, nothing feels urgent, and that's what makes it deadly. The title of this story points to something larger than one crime, a murder so horrifying it changed U.S. law. But the truth is, before laws changed, before courtrooms and DNA databases, this story began in the most unremarkable way possible, with a young woman simply trying to get home. Katie Sepich was 22 years old. She was a graduate of New Mexico State University, practical, driven, and standing on the edge of a future she had worked hard to build. She planned to begin her MBA program that fall. To support herself, she waited tables at a local restaurant. Friends described her as outgoing, cheerful, and easy to be around. Her mother described her as straightforward, the kind of person who said what she meant and meant what she said. Katie had been dating Joe Bischoff, someone she met in college. What started as friendship grew into something serious enough that Katie spoke openly about marriage, serious enough that wedding conversations had already begun, even if they were still premature. Joe had recently moved away after graduating, but over Labor Day weekend in 2003, he returned to Las Cruces. The visit was meant to be happy, a reunion, a pause before real life resumed. On Saturday night, August 30th, Katie went out with Joe and a group of friends. They moved from bar to bar, laughing, drinking, doing what thousands of college towns do every weekend. Eventually, the night ended at a house party. Loud music, too many people, the kind of place where time blurs and plans dissolve. And then, at some point, Katie left. No dramatic goodbye, no argument that anyone immediately flagged as dangerous. She simply walked out. The distance from the party house to her home was just over a mile, a short walk, especially in a town she knew well, a route she'd taken before, a decision that felt safe because it had always been safe. Here's the question no one asked that night. How dangerous is almost home? Katie didn't take her purse, she didn't take her phone, she didn't take her keys. Whether she forgot them or intended to come back quickly, no one realized it mattered. Not yet. Joe and one of Katie's roommates stayed behind at the party, assuming she had made it home without issue. By morning, the assumption would collapse. Because when the sun came up, Katie wasn't answering calls. She wasn't in her bed. She wasn't anywhere she was supposed to be. And while her friends were still trying to understand where she could have gone, something else was already waiting in the desert outside the city. Because Katie didn't just disappear that night. She was already gone, and no one knew it yet. What do you do when the place no one ever checks becomes the place where the truth is hiding? Gravel crunching under slow-moving tires, the dry wind of the desert carrying nothing but heat and silence. A landscape so empty it feels safe, until it isn't. On the morning of August 31st, 2003, while Katie's family and friends were just beginning to realize something was wrong, a local resident drove near an old landfill outside Las Cruces, New Mexico. It wasn't a place people lingered. It wasn't scenic. It was the kind of forgotten space where trash went to disappear. That's where the body was found. A young woman lay face down near the dump site. There was no identification, no purse, no phone, no way to immediately know who she was. But it was clear almost instantly that this was not an accident. The position of her body, the condition of the scene, nothing about it suggested chance. Police arrived and began documenting what they could without yet knowing the name of the person they were standing over. She appeared to be between 21 and 23 years old. She was partially nude. Her pants had been removed and lay tangled near her legs. There were marks on her arms, scratch marks, defensive wounds, the unmistakable signs of someone who had fought back with everything they had left. Under her fingernails, investigators found something crucial: skin cells and blood that did not belong to her. DNA, a silent witness clinging to the last moments of her life. At the time, no one could have known how important that single detail would become, or how long it would take to matter. There were also marks on her neck, evidence of strangulation, the primary cause of death. The ground around her body showed no signs of a prolonged struggle, leading investigators to a chilling conclusion. She hadn't been killed there, she had been brought there after the fact. Then came the detail that made the scene even more disturbing. Burn marks on her back and arms, not enough to destroy her body, but enough to tell a story. Someone had tried to set her on fire. Gasoline had likely been poured over her in an attempt to erase evidence. The fire didn't last long, it failed, but the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't just murder, it was an attempt to make someone disappear. Around the same time, back in town, Katie's roommate made a call that would freeze her family in place. Katie hadn't come home. No one had heard from her. Hospitals were checked, friends were called, nothing. When Katie's father arrived at the morgue later that day, the worst fear every parent carries but never believes will come true became real. He identified the body. The desert victim had a name now: Katie Sepich. The news shattered her family. It shattered the sense of safety in Las Cruces. A town that had felt predictable and quiet was suddenly faced with a terrifying reality. Someone capable of this violence had walked its streets and might still be there. Police knew one thing immediately. This was not random chaos. This was a predator. And predators don't stop after one kill. So the question shifted, not just who did this, but how close had he already come to doing it again? How quickly does suspicion turn into certainty when grief is desperate for someone to blame? A screen door closing somewhere down the block, shoes scraping against gravel in the dark, a bedroom window that never quite became a door. With Katie identified, investigators began doing what they always do first: rewinding time. They needed to understand her final hours with ruthless precision: where she had been, who she was with, what choices were made when no one thought they mattered. The night before her body was found, Katie had been out with friends, moving from bar to bar before ending at a house party. It was a familiar route, a familiar group. Nothing about the evening suggested danger until the moment she left. Witnesses told police that Katie walked away from the party alone. No purse, no phone, no keys. Just over a mile separated the party house from her own front door. A short walk, a walk she'd likely taken before without thinking twice. But she never made it inside. When detectives searched the area around Katie's home, they found something quietly devastating. Her shoes were lying outside, near her bedroom window, the window she would have used if she'd forgotten her keys. Footprints in the gravel showed signs of a struggle, not inside the house, not down the street, right there. The conclusion was chillingly simple. Katie had been attacked by someone as she tried to climb back into her own home. Someone who was watching, someone who waited for that exact moment of vulnerability. At the same time, detectives began questioning the people closest to her. Naturally, their attention turned to Katie's boyfriend, Joe. He had been with her earlier that night. Witnesses said the two had argued at the party after Katie allegedly saw him kissing another woman. Some believed that argument was why she left so abruptly. Joe's behavior raised questions. He initially refused to provide a DNA sample. He hired a lawyer quickly. He left town soon after. In a case with no obvious suspect, those actions felt heavy, almost impossible to ignore. Investigators found that Katie and Joe had been intimate earlier that night. Detectives collected her bedsheets, hoping to compare DNA. The results mattered more than anyone wanted them to. The DNA from the sheets did not match the DNA found under Katie's fingernails. Joe was eliminated as the killer. It didn't erase the confusion or the pain surrounding his actions, but it did remove him from the center of the investigation. The person who killed Katie was still out there, and now the case felt even frightening because it appeared to be the work of a stranger. Police canvassed the neighborhood. They went door to door along the route Katie would have walked. No one had seen anything. No screams, no struggle, no suspicious vehicles. It was as if the attack had happened in a blind spot no one realized existed. One detail stood out. Tire tracks near the dump site suggested a pickup truck, but in a region where pickups were common, that clue led nowhere. Katie's rings, including the one Joe had given her, were missing, taken, not lost, removed by whoever killed her. The case began to stall. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the only solid lead left was the DNA trapped beneath Katie's fingernails. A lead that, because of the law at the time, couldn't yet point to a name. And as the investigation slowed, a far more disturbing possibility emerged. What if the man who killed Katie had already done this before, or was already planning to do it again?
What happens when the one thing that could save lives is locked away by the law meant to protect them? Paper shuffling in a quiet evidence room. A lab freezer humming softly, holding answers no one is allowed to use. Time passing, not loudly, but relentlessly. As weeks turned into months, the investigation into Katie Sepich's murder slowed to a crawl. Detectives hadn't stopped working, they hadn't stopped caring, but they were trapped inside a system that gave them only one real lead and no legal way to act on it. The DNA under Katie's fingernails was clear, clean, preserved. It belonged to the man who had killed her. But in New Mexico, as in most states at the time, DNA could only be collected from someone after they had been convicted of a crime, not when they were arrested. That meant something terrifyingly simple. If the killer wasn't already in prison, his DNA wasn't in the system. Katie's mother, Gian, couldn't accept that reality. Like any parent trying to make sense of the unimaginable, she believed logic would eventually prevail. Surely someone capable of this violence would be arrested again. Surely, once his DNA was taken, everything would fall into place. When detectives explained the law to her, the truth landed like a second loss. Even if the killer was arrested tomorrow for another violent crime, his DNA still wouldn't be tested until he was convicted and sentenced. Until then, the one piece of evidence that mattered most would remain silent. The town of Las Cruces lived under that silence. Police feared the same thing the family did, that whoever killed Katie would strike again. This wasn't a crime of impulse, it was targeted, opportunistic, calculated. A stranger who watched,
waited, and acted when he saw vulnerability. Then, about a year later, news broke from hundreds of miles away. In Wisconsin, a young woman was attacked, sexually assaulted, and set on fire. But unlike Katie, she survived by pretending to be dead until her attacker left. She gave police a description. Composite sketches were released. 2 men were arrested and later convicted for that crime. For a moment, hope flickered. One of the suspects had family ties to Las Cruces. Could this finally be the link investigators needed? DNA testing answered that question quickly. Neither man matched Katie's DNA. Once again, the case collapsed back into uncertainty. The years passed quietly, but the danger didn't. Behind the scenes, the killer continued living a normal life. No alarms, no restrictions, no one watching him. Then, nearly 3 years after Katie's murder, a breakthrough finally came, not because the law worked, but because time and persistence collided. In December of 2006, a DNA sample entered the system from a man who had recently been sent back to prison. When that sample was processed and run through CODIS, the computer flagged a match. The name that appeared was Gabriel Avila. He had an extensive criminal history. He had been out of prison at the time of Katie's murder, and most disturbingly of all, he didn't know Katie at all. When investigators confronted him, they found Katie's ring in his pickup truck. Faced with the evidence, Avila confessed. He described seeing Katie walking alone. He described offering help, and he described the moment he attacked her. It was over, but the relief was incomplete because investigators now knew something worse. Less than 3 months after killing Katie, Avila had broken into a house occupied by 2 female college students, armed with a knife. He was arrested, he was released on bond, and then he disappeared. If his DNA had been collected at that arrest, Katie's killer would have been identified years earlier. So the case was solved, but the question remained. How many lives could have been protected if the law had been different?
What does justice look like when it arrives too late? And can grief ever be turned into protection for others? A courtroom falling silent. A mother gripping a statement she never wanted to write. A law born from a name that should never have become one. When Gabriel Avila finally stood before the court, the facts were no longer in question. The DNA matched. The ring was recovered. His confession aligned with the evidence investigators had been carrying for years. The stranger who watched Katie struggle at her bedroom window, who offered help before turning violent, was no longer anonymous. In 2007, Avila was sentenced to 69 years in prison. In court, he apologized. He asked for leniency, words that felt small against the weight of what had been taken. Katie's father responded with a statement that cut through the room with brutal clarity. They would never see their daughter again in this lifetime. The man who took her life should never walk free again. For most cases, this is where the story ends. A conviction, a sentence, a quiet expectation that time will somehow soften what cannot be fixed. But for Katie's family, the story wasn't over. They couldn't stop thinking about the years that had slipped by, the moment when Avila had been arrested for another violent crime, released and allowed to disappear because his DNA was never collected. They couldn't ignore the reality that Katie's killer had nearly been caught sooner, not because of bad police work, but because of a legal barrier no one questioned until it was too late. Katie Sepich made a decision rooted in grief, not anger. If the law had failed Katie, it wouldn't fail the next woman. She began speaking publicly, meeting legislators, explaining again and again why DNA collection at arrest for violent crimes wasn't about punishment, it was about prevention.
about stopping repeat offenders before they escalated, about giving investigators the tools they already had but weren't allowed to use. In 2006, New Mexico passed what became known as Katie's Law, requiring DNA collection from anyone arrested for certain violent crimes. It passed with overwhelming support, only 5 votes against it. The impact didn't stop there. In 2010, Katie's Law became the foundation for a federal standard. Today, more than 30 states have adopted similar laws. Thousands of cases have been solved. Countless victims have been protected, not because a crime was undone, but because another one never happened. Katie's mother would later say that grief never truly closes. There is no final chapter, but there is movement, purpose, a way to carry loss forward without letting it be the end of the story. Katie Sepich didn't get the future she was planning. She didn't get her MBA. She didn't get the life she was building. But her name changed the system that failed her. And every time a DNA match stops a predator early, her legacy is still at work. So the question we're left with isn't just who killed Katie Sepich. It's how many lives were saved because her story refused to end in silence.